So again, just to remind everybody of the panel was really take a look at Woolf University. What does it mean for all of us, if anything? And being in technology for 25 years, working supercomputer company, education now for another 20 years, my illustrious provost next to me here too, we have literally found that the blockchain in the technology is really going to be the transformative things. That we don't like to use the word disruptive, because the truth is, who wants to be disrupted in life? And so I'm sort of opposed to disruptive technology, rather transformative technology. So I just want to give a few high-level overviews to help the panel get more discussion than anything by sort of giving the right illustration. So if you take a look, the Best Buy vending machine, if you would have saw that in an airport 30 years ago, you would have thought, wow, that looks out of place. But yet today it's just normal, and it becomes possible because the Internet of Things allows the kind of transactions of a credit card going in, any part to drop out, and you're on your way. And so the provost, Dr. Kathleen Reed-Martinez, came up with the concept of fluid technology and fluid education, so we're not bogged down with mobile technology by itself, because technology by itself is not that helpful until you apply it to something. So when you take a look at Woolf or Oxford University's Blockchain University, is it blended learning going too far on one extreme? Or is it an ingenious digital education machine being constructed as you look at that? So you take a look at Woolf University's concept. This is what I spoke in 2016. I just didn't use the word blockchain, but it really ended up being what blockchain was. Blockchain should be viewed as the next generation of the internet that designs trust, personalization, security, and integration to all worldwide data. It has the sophistication to blend the best of artificial intelligence, mixed realities, machine learning, deep learning, fluidity, and the Internet of Things for full personification of intelligence. The key word is intelligence in this case is that the reason only 6% of the world has an education or post-high school degree, diploma, or anything is simply because we packaged it in 4-year blocks of time. And America, I hate to say it, but actually we have 45.6% of our adults with a post-high school certificate of some sort or degree. But if we really want to reach the world, you would actually deconstruct that and pass intelligence to start looking at it. And I believe if you look at Woolf's proposal and what they're working on, it's pretty close to that. But this is the key. You know, the person who invented the first wheel, they claim was an idiot. The person who invented the other three, he became a genius. And when you look at iterative technology, it's really that. The internet at first was under the web browser called Mosaic. People, what is Mosaic? What is happening at the University of Illinois? And people are wondering, do we get on the internet? What's it going to cost? All the same kind of metaphors that we see today with blockchain. So you will watch Woolf University do what they're going to do. They've got all the funding already. They're in multiple countries already. But it'll be actually the second iteration or third iteration of that before people pick up on it and start leveraging it. So I wouldn't panic that you're not on board, but I would panic if you're just completely ignoring it and shoving it out the door as just a fleeting technology, because it's far from that. So blockchain, as I reported to the United Nations, you can see on this, really should have never been called the Internet of Things to support it, because if all the internet becomes is about things, opening garage doors, warming up your hot water heater, we're a miserable lot because we make it about things, not people. So the internet of freedom, dignity is probably more applicable, but it really requires people to apply technology and focus that way instead of just go with every latest fad. So this is the Best Buy vending machine completely possible today when you're actually doing smart contracts. We know that we can all do things electronically and digitally, and you watch the commercials on TV where IBM's tracking tomatoes and coffee beans, all possible. It's just that education isn't quite that precise, meaning that we can see how it would work in another industry all the time, but we can't see it in education. I think we were hearing from an IBM expert today, and he says probably this simple: food is easy because there's a couple conglomerate food organizations that make the world trade work. In education, nobody controls much of anything. Everyone's left to their own belief system of that they're different and unique. And therefore, without some kind of consortium, it would be difficult to make it work. However, if we take a look, just common sense, back in 1994, if we would have heard these same companies that you see presented here, Coca-Cola, FedEx, say, oh, pay attention to the internet, it'll change the way we do business. A lot of people ignored it, but within 25 years, 50% of Fortune 500 companies went out of business because they didn't pay attention to the internet and to the smartphone. And so these companies that you see illustrated here are those that are saying we're now on blockchain. And they get it, but they need to get it because they're in a supply chain where it goes way beyond what we do in education. We have only advanced as far in education as something called a student life cycle or academic cycle. And I'll show that momentarily. So Walmart makes blockchain mandatory now for anybody selling produce, so people at home can actually track the product now. And so we see all around us it's happening, blockchain Oxford, Woolf University being the first one out of the chute with education. But this is really what people want. They want options, they want digital, they want it in less than 60 seconds. And everybody's used to doing Uber, Starbucks card, mobile card, doing the Amazon Prime, but ultimately they want education degrees, trusted news, royalty points, and you can see the points that are being made there. But ultimately what blockchain is trying to fix is the greatest famine of all time, not food, not machinery, not information, but it's the famine of trust. Nobody trusts anyone. Everybody's distrusting, because whether it's media or not, there's actually a book you should read called Factfulness. Factfulness is by Hans Rosling, and it documents the story. 20 years ago, we've mislabeled everyone else in the world, including ourselves. And it's changed. So he says, false news has been around for 20 years. We're just seeing it different because the political system's taken advantage of it. So the blockchain becomes that new trusted entity that we get to work through. And so really I'm gonna fast forward just a little bit here to give you the metaphoric example. Bitcoin is to blockchain what Mosaic was to the internet. The Mosaic web browser was the first web browser, and it disappeared, but the internet lived on. Cryptocurrency is to blockchain what DARPANET, HTML, and cybersecurity is the internet. It disappears, it changes, but the internet lives on. So in the category of blockchains, the same neutral kind of technology that will live on, but Bitcoin will die off, and cybersecurity or cryptocurrency will do the same thing. So in real simple terms, whether it's Walmart, whether it's Cambodian farmers being treated fairly now because of blockchain, is a huge movement for humanity. In fact, human trafficking now is being documented in a blockchain, as well as blood diamonds can be identified now that were taken with the wrong intent. And so again, as educators, we say, okay, the world around us can keep changing using blockchain, or we would have said in 1994, internet, but we really need to pay attention to say, how do we help not just ourselves, but all of humanity if we truly care about things? There's enough use cases with blockchain, so it's hard to ignore it. But here's that student life cycle. We let the world develop a supply chain because they're connected around the world. But in higher ed, it's the student life cycle to see if we can retain and recruit students and keep them retained long term as well. So if this is all we've accomplished, we've missed the greatest improvements in technology around the world, to the point that the value divide is starting to be seen now, that we don't see the value of students in their life. We only see them within our organization. So at that, I'm going to turn it over to Dr. Sears. I just wanted to get sort of a backdrop open so we can open the discussion and even challenge some of these thoughts that I have here.
You know, it's interesting being in this conversation, because this is probably one of the first workshops or panels that I've been on where I'm a little bit more on the skeptic side. Usually I'm in Michael Mathews' role of being the on the enthusiast side, and but it's more, there's an open question. So I can see the short-term impact for blockchain, and the short-term impact is really that it could provide a protocol to authenticate transcripts. If you look through some of the slides, there's this thing called chain script. Ultimately, it'd likely be implemented by National Student Clearinghouse, because they're really the intermediary that enables exchanging of transcripts, and maybe a few companies that also do that. The other thing that's obvious is it's kind of, the latest thing, and there aren't that many blockchain programmers. So, the implication is you can create education programs for blockchain programming. On the long-term impact, there's a phrase that's been used that it can be a trust engine to provide a generalized alternative to accrediting degrees. So that's what a lot of this is about, is, could it create a currency? And, one of the challenges would be, how do you get it? You know, a lot of the stuff with blockchain right now is a single or a few currencies, but degrees in many ways are, you know, thousands of currencies. So you know, it could do something called disintermediation, create mass disintermediation in higher education. So I'll talk about that. And it, in many ways, creates technocratic mechanism that could replace the government's role. I believe it's most likely to happen through a company. So I'll talk about the long-term impact. So the idea behind disintermediation is, so this is the value chain right now in higher education. I mean, you could add steps in it, but you have an educator and, you know, their stuff, and I guess you could kind of change the order. You have a higher education institution that works with the government, the accreditation agency, which is sanctioned by the government, and you have to go through all those entities really to get to the student to provide a degree to the employer. So what disintermediation would do is it would say, let's drop the government, let's drop an accreditation agency, and the higher education institution gets replaced with a disintermediating entity. So I'm intentional about not saying what that's going to be, but there are cases where we're already disintermediating higher education. So there's a lot of denominations. The one that's most commonly understood in higher education, there's a lot of denominations that don't really care whether or not you have an accredited degree, and they're ordaining people without worrying about that. So you're just saying we're going to have an educator, and you're going to have the denomination, and we're going to, you know, do ordination. Now MOOCs are starting to do that also, and you know, some of the certificates and badging. So if you pass, you know, the top machine learning course and you get a verified certificate, then that course is hard enough that people in the programming industry know that you know your stuff. So they may not really care, was it accredited? Blockchain could provide that. You know, there's also licensing. So states will license, in the US, will license people for various professions, you know, whether it be a hairdresser or an electrician or a plumber. And then there's also things like alternative accreditation. So these are all attempts to disintermediate. You know, I've thought about this a lot, and you know, whenever I was at MIT, this is actually back 20 years ago, and they're talking about how the internet was going to disintermediate industries, and it has in a lot of industries. You know, Amazon.com, you know, a lot of the iTunes, things along those lines. The intermediaries have been displaced in many cases and replaced with another intermediary. But the fields that are most likely to be disintermediated first in education are places where employers are willing to hire skilled workers without accredited degrees. So tech companies, you know, there's an announcement, Apple and Google recently both, I think, said that degrees aren't required for their employees. And I think part of it is, it's not that they don't care about degrees, but it's just one of many signals. And the other signals, it shouldn't be, you know, the showstopper signal. There may be other signals that are better. It's also going to be more likely to be disintermediated if the qualifications in that field are more objectively assessed. So if you're in a STEM field, I mean, if you're a mathematician, then people can figure out how smart you are fairly easy with standardized tests and with MOOCs and things like that. Computer programming is kind of the same thing. If you're an early childhood care worker, you know, taking a standardized test isn't going to show do you care for kids very well, or, you know, things along those lines, or, you know, even being a pastor. One of the biggest things, though, is that there is an incentive not to limit the supply of workers, and there isn't entrenched profession licensing regulation. I'll just use an example. So City Vision, the school I run, our largest degree program is addiction studies. We tried to launch a master's program in counseling, and we essentially were blocked. And it's unfortunate, I won't name the name of the school, but it was the accreditation group that was over this. The head of it was from a Christian school, and they basically blocked us from doing this because we were going to be about a third of the price of their degree program. And they, effectively blocked us from being able to offer a master's program because there's an entrenched, all of a sudden you have a lot more people in the field. And then, that's going to be a problem. And that's a lot of what, regional versus national accreditation can be about. But computer programming is an example where, Google and everyone else, they want to increase the supply, and there isn't, licenses, like you have to be licensed to be a computer programmer. So it's not, so on the question of blockchain, I think part of it is a question of where is it most likely to happen. So that would be, where would get disintermediated, and this applies to MOOCs, this applies to certificates, other things. But then there's the question of where's the source going to come from. You need an industry that will accept a common currency of trust that is a better signal than degrees. Like I said, most likely going to happen in the tech industry. The sources, I think the most likely source, I put these in order of what I think is most likely. A generalized company becomes the Facebook of blockchain. So someone figures out the magic formula, they scale up, and they, become, basically, they own that space. I think the next most likely would be a freelance portal like Upwork or freelancer.com, where they actually create their own currency. And somewhat you get this through ratings. But secondarily, I think that you could start to see, these freelance companies probably have better data than universities would in terms of qualifying candidates. The other, I think, most likely would be an existing tech giant like LinkedIn. I think, if I had to pick anyone who's out there right now who might do this, I think LinkedIn might be the one. It could be education, loan, and financing companies. They could create a currency where they put value on these things. So you tie in and pay back some through some sort of currency related to your loan. It could be MOOCs that do this. And I think the most unlikely out of these categories, but it is possible, is existing higher education entities. And I also think that it's very likely that the most significant disintermediation comes from forms other than blockchain. While I was at MIT, I did my computer science dissertation on something similar to this. It was how you could have directories for services like Skype and FaceTime and things like that. And I was idealist, and I thought if you get a technical standard that allows all these things to talk to each other, then they'll talk to each other. But the reality is the market didn't want that. Well, not the market. The customers wanted that. The businesses didn't. So, Skype can't talk with FaceTime, and, you have this balkanization of standards, and I think that's likely to happen. So I'm going to go into a more philosophical discussion. So there's this debate that goes on between technological determinism versus social constructionism. So technological determinism is basically technology shapes society. And social constructivism is that society shapes technology. Now, both of these are kind of, you can view them in the extreme that it's 100%, but, everyone kind of agrees it's in the middle. But where it gets interesting is where is one true and where is the other more true? So, some of the factors on technological determinism, technology dominates if we let it. The counter to that is, technology is not really dominating very well in places like North Korea. If you have a strong enough will of society, then, you can shut things down. China's, firewall, the Great Firewall of China, is pretty effective. In the Middle East, there's still exceptions, but they have significantly shut down, pornography and other things there. And so then you have, in this space where, it depends on the will technology dominate or government policy? One example of technological determination is the inevitability of disruptive innovation. For someone who's been trying to disrupt, and for 20 years, what I've seen is where it works is in certain areas, often unregulated. And, you know, I went and I met with the number 2 guy under Clayton Christensen, and I said, what do you think about, you know, the likelihood of disrupting in spaces where there's regulation, and what research has been done? And he said, there's no research in that space. And I was like, are you serious? How can you ignore this? You know, it's like both sides are blind to the other. And I think it's interesting, you know, what happens whenever you have that conflict. So, you know, technological determinism, we're in Western society where it's free market. We're essentially saying, yes, we're going to let technology determine things. And, you know, whereas tech disruptors right now, there's a reason why Google isn't going into higher education. There's a reason why they're not going in very much into healthcare. And even whenever I partnered with Straighterline, one of the early, you know, innovative companies in this space, I was kind of shocked that they said, no, for the first 5 years, we do not want to do anything that could relate to government regulation, because that would hamper their ability to innovate. So the other thing is, over the long term, because there's global competition, if one country significantly restricts technology, then they could lose some competitive advantage, right? So over time, you know, technological determinism, you know, say over 50, 100-year time, starts to become more interesting. So, you know, what happens with blockchain and, you know, disruptive innovation over 50 or 100 years, it seems much more likely. I'm more in the technological determinist camp. In the next 10 years, I'm kind of in the social constructivist camp, and I'll tell a little bit of the reason why. And I think this is some of the reasons why I think Wolff University is unlikely to succeed. You know, the first reasons, regulatory reasons, they're unlikely to get accredited under Oxford. I mean, I've tried to do different things in this space, and I've talked with a lot of people who've tried to do different things. Essentially, what you're doing is you're asking permission to launch a revolution by those who would be most hurt by it. So, and Matthew, maybe you can add a little more detail about the Malta accreditation. But if they get accredited in Malta, that's basically like Malta printing a bunch of money. And it's not going to be, you know, Oxford money is worth a lot more than Malta money. So, you know, just because Malta prints a bunch of, you know, currency doesn't mean that it's going to have value in the global market. And, you know, I actually think, so if you look at the market for labor in the world, it's 60% of the global economy. And the idea that the entire underpinnings of that are going to go away without there being some sort of, you know, we had the Cold War for most of the 20th century, and, you know, I think this could be like, if you try to change the underpinnings of 60% of society, it's going to be a big deal. It's not going to be a minor change. It's going to, you know, affect a lot of people. So the other reasons are, I looked at the team at Wolff. They really don't have tech expertise. And I just think, you know, Facebook could have been invented by someone who is a non-technologist, but I think it's likely that this is going to come out of a technologist space. Whenever I read Wolff, you know, I wondered, is this kind of a fantasy of how blockchain, it's almost like The Empire Strikes Back or something. The faculty have been getting screwed by technology, basically completely screwed by technology. And it's basically, they can get a technology story to get their revenge on administration. That's what it sounded like. And whenever I looked at it, I'm like, these are philosophy people who are doing this. Well, they're idealists, you know, they want to dream that this is going to happen, but I'm kind of cynical. So, and part of the reason why I'm cynical also, and this is probably the biggest, is the market reasons. You know, if you look at the financial scale that's needed, the higher education market is almost a $2 trillion market. The global video market, including TV and movies, is 286 billion. So what is the math on that? Something like 7 times bigger. Education 7 times bigger than all the, you know, the global video market. So you're going to need something probably bigger than Netflix if you're going to disrupt it. And Netflix had a lot of money to do that. Now, it could be that something magical just happens and all of a sudden it, you know, gets viral like Facebook did. But even Facebook, you know, they got $100 million investment to allow them to scale. So whoever it's going to be is going to need, you know, those investments, because whoever, you know, if there's say 3 companies that dominate this space, they will probably each be $1 trillion company, like, you know, Apple. And the other thing, and this is my cynical side again coming out, you know, I was at MIT where I studied under the father of the internet. And right at the point whenever I came to MIT, almost all the standards were established by people like him. After the web got big, almost all the standards were set by Google or Apple or other people. So they just decide what they're going to do, and the world lives with it. And they, you know, publish them as open standards, but it's not the, you know, tech democracy of the Internet Engineering Task Force. That season is over. I don't think that's happened for, you know, 20 years. So I don't know if you all ever watch The Simpsons, but this was one of my favorite episodes whenever they had these robot, can't even remember what it was, some sort of robot insect where they were taking over the world, and the newscaster said, "I, for one, welcome our new robot overlord." So there's kind of that question here of, you know, if we replace the government's role in education, I'm not a fan of government. I'm really not a fan of government, but I'm not sure that an algorithm, no matter how complex, is going to be better, because it's going to be, you know, technocracy. It could be, and I feel like the bigger debate that this gets into, and you know, if I had to say, okay, what's the counter for this? It's this book called Geek, Heresy. I would encourage all of you to read it. I am, you know, a geek, and over the past 20 years, I would say 20 years ago, I believed all these 10 commandments in the culture of technology. So the idea is measurement over meaning. You know, MIT is the holy grail of objectivism. Quantity over quality, ultimate goals over root causes, destination over path dependence, external over internal, innovation over tried and true, intelligence over wisdom, value neutrality over value engagement, and individualism over collectivism. So technology, if you follow technological determinism, that it defines everything, and you just believe in technology, then you kind of follow these things. There's another path, and this book is probably the most effective criticism I've seen of this type of philosophy. That, you know, in many ways, what I would say is happening is the world is being colonized by technology. In some ways, that's actually helpful. It is, you know, providing education and resources to people like never before. But in other ways, you know, it can feel like the, you know, Roman Empire taking over. if you're getting colonized, you basically have to adapt to the culture of technology or die. And to a certain extent, I think that's true. But to another extent, I think, you know, we're called to be critical of it. And so, you know, I'd just like to leave with this, you know, I guess paraphrase, you know, from the Bible: be in the world, but not of it. So I think that the summary is be in the culture of technology, but not of it. So don't adopt the technocracy, the you know, 10 commandments of, you know, technology, but learn from technology and then apply it in the context. So yeah, so hopefully that's helpful. Hopefully that'll spark discussion from other people. So that's it from my side.
Yeah. Great job, Dr. Sears. And Jonathan, if you want to say something, or maybe it's time to open up for a panel discussion, or if you want me to go over a few more things, but I think the discussion will be great and healthy.
I think, so I was going to thank both Dr. Mathews and Dr. Sears for really outstanding presentations. Dr. Mathews, if you want to respond first, that would be entirely in order.
Okay, so, you know, one of the things that I've watched over, you know, studying technology for the last 25 years is that which technologies are neutral, meaning nobody really owns them. And the internet is one, smartphone is the other. Nobody owns smartphone, but Samsung makes one. And so human nature is to allow the neutral technology to survive. So Bitcoin will not survive. Blockchain will, because it's just another generation of internet. And IBM goes out, sets out the stage that they're already doing massive $1 billion worth of business on blockchain. Now, education will be its normal self and trying to avoid anything that requires change. That's just part of the nature of the beast. No different than the internet. If each of you in education recall the day the smartphone came out, faculty were still trying to fight off students bringing this into the classroom. But eventually they had to surrender and say, this is a learning tool if used right. And so it would be hard for me to even come close to saying the blockchain is not going to be around for a long time. But here's what proves it, is the US Library of Congress came up with something called the MARC code, M-A-R-C code, 40 years ago. And it's what allows you and I to check out a book or periodical from the library from anywhere in the world, and there can only be one copy on that bookshelf. You can't have two. ISBN number tied with the MARC code, which has the Dewey Decimal System in it. The difference is nobody feels threatened by the US Library of Congress, which owns the MARC code. But they would feel threatened if Pearson or McGraw-Hill or a tech company owned it. So our human nature is to always fight off when somebody owns a product, and it's just who we are. But when nobody owns the internet, if I ask everybody here, who owns the internet? Nobody really knows. I know who owns it, or at least monitors it. Blockchain is the same way, but people own Bitcoin. So we'll see blockchain, IBM will leverage it. It'll go on for a long time, but we'll see the consumer nature of that technology be used before educators, because education, again, sees big clunky things. For the first time in the history of education, Oral Roberts has been invited, and the provost will speak there at the Consumer Electronics Show, because we really believe that we're close at consumerizing technology. So Oral Roberts already issues blockchain for all our certificates. Didn't take more than about 2 hours to set it up. People love it. There's only one master copy. I don't have to go around telling everybody how difficult it is or anything. It's that simple. And it's ironic. I'm here in Silicon Valley, and I worked at Cray Research Supercomputer Company, and Seymour Cray, the inventor, couldn't fathom how the Apple computer was designed, even though he's designing supercomputers. And that's, we all see our piece of the world, but if you can step back from it and start saying, oh, both the Macintosh or Apple survived, and so did Cray Research supercomputers, just two different worlds that were there. And so as I see blockchain, it's that simple. We've overcomplicated probably it because Bitcoin gets mixed in and regulatory things. So Malta actually passed the legislation to make it viable. California just passed 2 legislation bills last week to make it possible here, in 5 other states as well. So it's happening, but it's back to that wheel. Hey, the internet wasn't supposed to last more than 5 years. Here it is that many years later. So enough said on that. Be glad to answer questions or just let it flow.
Sounds great. We can go in any direction, but I'd recommend clarifying questions. If you have clarifying questions, let's get those cleared first to either of our authors.
Great. Yeah, I think we're tackling blockchain in such a macro way, where you can't have a blockchain system within an existent system, meaning the operation of an institution based on, transcripting. But that's reframed within that, the construct of that particular system. So you can't have that. But I think the bigger conversation is around the decentralization of the system as a whole. So that's a completely different conversation, because so when you decentralize it as a whole, then you have the ability to have that flexibility to be able to acquire it and validate it without having to go back to that centralized location. So in this case, Oral Robert being able to use blockchain for their transcript and their register system, it works in that sense because the centralization of it, it's still being controlled by Oral Robert. Than if it was the accreditation body of multiple universities that Oral Roberts under. So I feel like, we have to be able to define it in the context of what we're talking about in order to better understand it. Where with the Wolff University, their concept is really decentralizing the entire, concept of learning and acquisition of knowledge without one body being the owner of it. And that's kind of the same blockchain that cryptocurrency have used in terms of, you know, miners are the ones that are determining the transaction, multiple miners all over different places. So I just wanted to make sure that we get some clarification around that as in a way that we're talking about it, you know, the
Sure.
sense.
Sure. If I could respond to that, I'm going to share my screen and show you what University of Texas at Austin does. And so on there, you see a trust and verify. Everybody give me a thumbs up if you see that. So they're the first ones a year and a half ago, because the Texas higher ed system literally can transport and transfer high school diplomas and transcripts everywhere. So it's not, you know, Wolff doing everything or Roberts just doing Oral Roberts. The computer cloud and Internet of Things makes it possible for you to do any of those extremes. In fact, the company that's actually doing Oxford's already has all the technical expertise. So Oxford, the faculty who are doing this have no need to know the technical stuff. It's already done, it's in the cloud. Today I stood in Silicon Valley, and they issued me in the computer cloud my certificate in blockchain in about 30 minutes. Okay, so the context really becomes this. The Internet of Things and computer cloud allows anybody to start transferring in a digital signal. Now, every education system, unless you're on the cheap, has the capability of importing these things between each other. It's just a surrender to say, yeah, we'll take anything in, or stop, you know, IT departments are overstaffed and therefore we don't have time to do documents or whatever. So again, trying to help build context. Or Roberts can do it in the cloud. Somebody else did it for us. I didn't have to worry about it. The entire state of Texas can do it. University of Central, or excuse me, it's the College of Central New Mexico just became the first community college on blockchain, issuing these all the time. They'll make a big announcement in Washington, D.C. when Oral Roberts is issuing the credentials for people attending that. So it's not limited to, you know, an institution, regulatory or anything. I think a lot of people have made up a lot of myth about regulatory things in education, such as FERPA. After all these years of FERPA, there's not one case about somebody violating it. So I get invited to the White House and they say, Mike, why is everyone so afraid of FERPA? There's no issues with it. I said, education worries about copyright, plagiarism, and anything that appears to be free or liberty with information or data. Now, what may happen, and you can pay attention, it brings a different context into this. There are 30 human rights in the world right now. And the 30th one, all 30 were done in 1948 with Eleanor Roosevelt and the United Nations. Right now, this next year in 2019, the 31st human right will come out, which says that data that exists in the world is my personal property. And I have a right to that personal property, which changes everything, because no lawsuits can exist if nothing's owned by somebody. And so nobody's been able to do anything with all the selling of records. So when you take a look at the truth behind education records, somebody has access to them to the point they can cheat on them and erase students' scores and put better ones so they get better funding. It's been proven in LA, Atlanta, New York, administrators cheating on data. So it behooves everyone to allow people to own their data and have access to it all the time. One piece more context. In Texas and Oklahoma, there was a flu epidemic this past December. They were looking for nurses left and right, hospital rooms filled. A major health organization in one of the largest cities couldn't hire 12 students from the local community college because they didn't have access to their transcription credentials. That CEO from the healthcare organization called up the chancellor and said, from this day forward, you will be on blockchain or we will hire your students. Now, that CEO doesn't have a clue what blockchain is other than healthcare is using it, food services using it, but he understood the concept. Every student should have the right to have their credentials with them at all times. So that's the real context. The fluidity of all the data that belongs to a student should be theirs, not theirs because the school is shut down 2 weeks at Christmas time. So enough said on that.
No, so I just want to clarify real quick. So the distinction that I was trying to make is the difference between backing your operation through blockchain than decentralizing an acceptance of an operation as a whole beyond just one institution. Like example, like the university that I worked for almost 4 years, it's a competency-based program. When they needed to turn their transcript into blockchain, it was super easy because the entire program was already modularized. So in terms of like the operationalize of what's happening within the system, that's one thing within itself. But I think what the Woolf University dissertation was presenting was really this whole concept of decentralizing and allowing educators to kind of be the owners of being able to be empowered to teach and to be able to validate knowledge that comes from their students. And that's a completely different conversation than finding a fancier way of providing transcript. I mean, most systems that are in place currently I mean, it's not going to take that much effort to be able to turn your transcript method into blockchain, then to decentralize, opening up options for institution as a whole, where someone can teach, a really good professor that's teaching a MOOC class has the same credibility than if that same professor was teaching at Oral Roberts or Harvard through the student's certification. So that's the piece where I feel like, I still feel like there's two different things happening here.
Oh, yeah, I agreed, and it's hard to understand. But let me ask a question. How many of you know cousins, nephews, in-laws that woke up in 6th grade and said, I want to be a college registrar when I grow up? Or I want to be a financial aid director when I grow up? Or I want to be a bursar when I grow up? And so it doesn't happen, but worse, there's no universities or college teaching process-oriented functions on a campus. So you can't go and get a 2-year degree in how to be a registrar or how to be a financial aid director. So what we're admitting is there is no protocol or common integration with what's already been proven by the government to be regulatory in registration or financial aid processing. So the first system called Volcado just came out, which proves the whole point. You no longer need a financial aid director, other than if you think it's required by law, because all these processes are pretty straightforward, and what's hindering people from being educated is what we can't automate because people start getting scared about FERPA registrars who are putting fear in them. And so blockchain becomes, in the simplest form, a method to collect things that have already been proven and can be processed automatically without human intervention. And that's why, it's a foregone conclusion it'll happen. Now, I may be wrong 10 years from now. If we see each other and say, Mike, you were wrong, I'll say, okay, I was wrong. But very doubtful based on the history of technology and the common sense of how broken education is around processes. But people want to come to our education systems because of the great content. And because of the great content, they'll send their sons and daughters, pay any amount of money. But what they don't like is the process to try and get into it, around it, or through it. And that's exactly what I believe Wolff is trying to do.
I'm hearing a lot of it around data and verification in that area. But the question of how do you verify the standards of what's being taught? So the actual classroom interaction is an essential part of the value of a degree and knowing the quality of teaching that takes place. I'm not reading in anything of the white paper that verifies that. There's no apparent screening of any of the academic staff who teach, and there's no quality analysis of actually from students of what comes back the other end.
You know what's interesting, Gary, is that the National Association of Manufacturers, which manufactures 70% of all jobs in America, has what they call stackable credentials that prove exactly what you need to be the best in any field. But if you go and ask 1,000 professors or deans if they know that entity even exists, they don't. So, and that's what's so embarrassing, is that all the credentials and measurement against them exist in the industry, but they're not connected into the institution. And that's one of the things that has to come out eventually, to say, if you knew these things existed and you didn't train to them, what were we thinking in that regard?
Can I ask a question that's kind of related to some of the conversation that's been had? And that is around, because clearly blockchain technology is amazing. It's going to solve a ton of problems, especially on the records side. But one of the biggest problems that blockchain has that, we're kind of talking around a little bit is It's supposed to prevent people from finagling with the record, especially your own record. But the problem is bad data is not solved by blockchain. So if I was just at a blockchain summit in Portland, and we were getting the song and dance about blockchain like equals the future, you know, for people. And so he gave a description of the New York DMV having 36% of its data being inaccurate. But when that data goes into blockchain, let's say there's a Genesis key, it goes into blockchain and it's wrong. What do you do about it? So you take that example and apply it to a university where mistakes happen all the time or grades need to change. It creates a big problem when you try to go in there and rectify this. And I'm curious to know how you see, I think FERPA ramps up a bit when people start saying, well, wait a second, you just messed with my blockchain and you've caused me all this heartache trying to rectify your mistake. How does that, how do you deal with that in this situation related to the general blockchain that you're kind of alluding to out there in higher education?
Here's how all the distrust started. About 25 years ago to 30 years ago, Microsoft started issuing these certificates that I'm a SQL certified administrator, or I'm a Microsoft this. All the replicate systems are all over the place now. And so nobody knows what the master copy is. So I have 8 different schools that I've graduated with a 2-year degree, certificate programs, 4-year degrees, and nobody can tell me what my master copy is. And so I've got about 400 copies floating around the world. And just because the university embosses it doesn't mean that's the original copy. Okay. So what blockchain does in its simplest form is it puts everything up at a meta layer that doesn't allow these competing replicate systems to put something up there. Only one can be identified as that master record, and it can't be unlocked or even changed by me. And that at least starts a baseline. Everything needs a baseline. I've been in computers a long time, so I'll see presidents get panicky. We said, Mike, we just saw a report that said we've got 10 veterans that are students who are dead. They died in battle. I said, don't panic, because your system's been lying to you all this time anyway. Now it's our time to clean that up, and we got a better baseline. And
right, but I guess that doesn't really answer the question that I'm raising, in the sense that if your baseline's wrong to begin with, blockchain doesn't solve that problem.
It's not only wrong, but it's biased. That it's decreasing access and opportunity. I would contend that we have an over-credentialed society. So we talk about these Microsoft certifications and other certifications, and then job postings list that as a minimum requirement for even applying to the job. Whereas people who might be self-taught or have learned in ways outside the system, but that were more affordable and accessible to them, are even restricted from applying. And I think that that's a serious social issue. My concern is that there are some possible futures of blockchain that could simply amplify that credentialing problem in society, where there may be others that might actually create some new opportunities. And the Wolff proposal seems to be focused upon amplifying the problem by making it a more elitist focus upon the top 200 universities. Most of the schools in this room are not welcome to be part of the initial launch of Wolff based upon their criteria. And the fact that they're limiting themselves to only accredited and higher ed institutions, as opposed to opening it up to those who have great expertise, but don't have the credentials that we've come to admire so much in many of our contexts.
Yeah, no, on the other extreme is, like I said, Central New Mexico, they're not worried about what Oxford's doing. They're worried about how they're helping students and treating students with accurate data, one copy, fluid all the time. And so it's really up to each college, like Oral Roberts, do we want to do it or don't we want to do it? I'm not waiting for regulatory stuff to make a good decision for our students. I'm making a good decision so our students get access to what's theirs to begin with. And I believe that, back to the question, blockchain doesn't solve anything, but it minimizes all these replicate systems that happen. There's only one. If it's bad, it's only one. It's not 20 different systems that have the same repeat of the same bad data. Now, and if whether it's Walmart or the tomatoes from IBM, time will tell. How many people are eating bad tomatoes and they couldn't track them back? How bad is that data? And so these other industries will prove for us how blockchain is efficient and working or not. So I'm not too worried that we're going to find out we got a mess on our hands.
Today, one of the comments that was made also is exactly what in the educational process, for instance, you're talking about the registrar, what should actually finally be in the final blockchain for that learner and for that student. So I think that begs part of that question when you say, is every single grade change? Well, you're using a learning platform. So is every single grade that that student's given as they're negotiating with the faculty member, do you go to that granular level to say that each of those would have to be blockchain? Obviously, I'm being a bit extreme there. But I think that does beg that question. And then one of the questions then becomes, if you have an error in the blockchain, you also, then the correction to the error must also be documented in the same way, so that you would at least have the ability to know what happens and what that chain of events looks like.
The one thing I just wanted to add, I think the missed opportunity for educators today is the fact that we have the opportunity to change how we measure learning outcomes. And, you know, if we're going to start utilizing blockchain as a way of, you know, making sure that what we're measuring is consistent in how we report back on them, I think the opportunity is to actually look at the different modality of measurement of learning, because we know for sure that there's so many different ways that students are acquiring knowledge that the old system of the way that we measure it doesn't fully represent that style. So I think we do have to go back beyond just the end deliverable, but really even the sub-criteria. I mean, coming from a competency framework, you know, then you can track it from the starting point. What were the learning matrix for that particular course? What were the learning objective, and what were the competencies? And so you're going from the completion of a course, which is 3 credits, to every little learning outcomes along the way that contributed to that bigger change. But so that's the piece where I feel like, you know, that's the opportunity to kind of rewrite how we measure learning moving forward, and including the different modalities that are presented today, because those are the students that are missing out. I mean, I work with predominantly adult learners that came from employer partners from all over America, employer partners that we work with. And the employer said, hey, here are the skills that we're looking for. And, you know, if our students can demonstrate it, we're ready to promote them. So, but most universities are not flexing in terms of the programs that they present, you know. So if we're just going to take what the legacy systems that we've been working on forever and say, okay, let's put it in blockchain. And the other thing about blockchain is it's you know, it's persistent and it's distributed. You can't tamper with once you've created those matrix. So the opportunity for me, it's like, how do we rewrite what we're measuring? How do we open it up? So then therefore, when we put it in place, it is inclusive to all students, not just, you know, the cream of the crops.
I was just going to say, I think that is really the true advantage. It has the opportunity for us to make certain that the student knows what he or she needs to know. How they got that information is obviously a challenge, that when we talk about the distribution of information and demonstration of that knowledge, but the ability to actually measure, know they've achieved it, document that, is an incredible resource for a student throughout his or her life, and will be essential for the lifelong learner of the future. And I would like to comment back to the Wolff. While I do believe that it's interesting to watch this experiment, this is going to be one of the critical factors, because at the end of the day, the process that they're using is simply dealing more with those professors and the administrative components. It's not getting into the actual deep learning things that you're discussing there, and making certain that those are put down and those will be carried with that person throughout life.
I had a question first, and then just a comment. Has everybody seen the video called The Ledger by the Institute for the Future? If you get a chance, go on and look at that, because it talks about this whole idea of where does learning take place, and how do we bring that together. The other, and this is a question about blockchain. My father always said, sometimes I know enough to be dangerous. So I read a book called Blockchain Revolution. I don't know if you've heard of it, by Don Tapscott. And one of the things he talks about in there is about mining. And one of the things about it is that the resources needed power-wise is a lot. So the question is, we can talk about it, but, and again, I haven't done a lot of studying in it, but where are we that we put everything out on blockchain? Is it able to actually function? Or is that still something we're still looking at? Yeah, there's little bits and pieces here, but if it goes to everybody using this as a form of secure data, do we have the power structure in place for people to mine it in order for it to be split off so that it becomes a reality?
Yeah, good question. Now, the difference between what education would use blockchain for and what data mining would be in cryptocurrencies and is completely different.
Correct.
So the person who wrote the book is absolutely correct. If you're out there grinding on systems across the country, you might shut down something. But for the purpose of education, and this is hard for educators to believe, if I ask 100 different universities, how many of you can process one student from applicant to acceptance in less than 24 hours? Not many, fortunately. And how about 2 days? How about 3 days? How about 4 days? How about 5 days? So the whole concept of blockchain and how education would use it is so minute in the light of grinding at data that there's no fear there. But if you move it away to mining data, absolutely.
Yeah, and that was my question. Does it affect it? But the thing called the ledger, go on and look at, because I think that really kind of plays into what we're talking about here. I'm a big process guy. I think blockchain is just the tool. I think what we're talking about here is how do we have a better form of processing so students have a better way of, not just students, everybody, lifelong learners have a better way of keeping their data to be able to, and what they've learned, and keep it secure and get through the system, not get bogged down. I think
absolutely.
Just one comment, Michael and James. I think most of these things that are going to happen over an academic framework, they're going to ride on things like Ethereum. Would you agree?
It'll be a version of that, but a different generation by the time education picks up on it. Ethereum will disappear.
But it'll be a platform that it won't just be a Wolf currency. There'll be 50 other types of currencies riding on the same platform. And the concern I have is scalability. You know, what we really have in blockchain, for the computer science guys, it is a replicated linked list, which is inefficient for many, many, many business problems. And frankly, scale does worry me. If Bitcoin, for example, were to become ubiquitous and McDonald's everywhere were to take it like Visa, there's not enough horsepower in any mining engine to handle that. What would in effect happen is that the decentralized structure would start to centralize around people who could afford huge infrastructures. So I think that we really need to take a look at the scale and consider whether or not blockchain is the thing that is the right solution for the problem.
So Michael, let me just jump in and try to answer a few of the questions people brought up that I think might be helpful. So, you know, one of the key questions that people are talking about is really how this could happen and how could you have good data? Well, part of how you get good data is you associate some sort of value with it. I mean, there's a few different ways you can do it. One is you create a value. So you could have, you know, whenever I talked about like how could you get to this path? So let me talk about one path. So Ethereum could become big, or something like Ethereum that creates a platform, and then they give you the ability to convert into real currency, whether, you know, Bitcoin, or at that point there'll be gateways to convert. You know, if you enable someone to get placed into a job, or you enable someone to hire into a job, they can have essentially like a finder's fee. But what it is there could be a value associated with the quality of your signal that you're giving. And it's the same type of thing for Upwork or Freelancer. So Upwork and Freelancer, they charge, X% as a part of the placement fee. But what they can start to do is they could start to tie in some sort of either a cryptocurrency or, a non-cryptocurrency that you're just able to convert this into, so that essentially what you're doing is you gain more of this currency as you build trust. So the generalized company would be someone that creates this universal trust engine. I mean, it's kind of like a holy grail that, even back in 1995, whenever I was talking with people about how do you generate trust, and now we have a mechanism that could possibly do it, but it's kind of like someone describing hyperlinks before the web's really there. So the functionality is there, but the pieces haven't come together. Another would be Microsoft or LinkedIn. They could create a currency. So whenever you get placed, that you have a universal, right now they're doing badging, right? So the question is, could they have a universal currency or possibly different denominations of currency? So you have a programmer currency, and your currency increases each time you do well in a freelancing job or in whatever other job. The same types of things could happen for loans. So that's one way you get value. What the Oxford proposal is really doing is they're creating a false scarcity. If you look at what they're proposing to do, is they're saying we're only going to take elite professors, we're only going to do this very one-to-one tutoring model, and in doing that, we're creating a false scarcity. So therefore, anything we publish is going to have value. And it's kind of the same philosophy behind the blockchain of like, there's really no value to just crunching on these prime numbers to mine Bitcoins. And to be honest, I'm not sure that all education has to be one-to-one tutoring, and I know that's the Oxford model, but what they're doing is they're saying, we're going to make it really hard to educate anyone, and therefore we're going to create a currency. So that, is another possibility. So I think all of those, if you get money associated with trust, so it's going to be the exchange between, do you get a trust currency that can be exchanged into real money? All those become an alternative, a complete alternative to, the way we currently do accreditation. And I think what's likely to happen is there's going to be domains of currency. Right now, whenever Microsoft does their certification, it's a democratizing force. It's not an elite force. They're saying, we're going to publish a currency. If you can pass this standardized test, then you're going to get a job somewhere, probably making $70,000 a year, and anyone can do it. You pass this standardized test, and that's better than what schools are offering right now. And it's if their test isn't working, then employers aren't going to use it. So hopefully that's answering some of the questions that were out there.
I have a question, and perhaps this changes our direction a little bit. But Andrew, I agree with your critique of the weaknesses of the Oxbridge approach to this through Wolff. My question is, okay, let's assume that there's some kind of a platform that allows for authentication of transcripts, and that you're able to establish some kind of a solid pedagogical model. Maybe it's not, the Oxbridge tutorial, but that you have a solid tutorial model. If what Wolff is saying has some truth about their ability to save costs through, say, automating administration, then I could imagine in the future that there's, the potential for not just the Wolff model, but, let's say networks of micro universities or micro campuses. And so we could, start to imagine a future where those exist. I guess my question is, for any of you, do you see, apart from the described weaknesses, is there some truth to what Wolff is talking about in terms of, is there actually a possibility that costs could be reduced through automating administrative functions, perhaps some other areas similar to that?
I think that it could. I think the challenge is, like, I'm going through a federal audit right now, and I've written all these papers about why does higher education cost so much, and the reality is these rules are Byzantine. I mean, they are absolutely insane, and if you violate them, then you're done. So the reason why it's so hard, my wife, she does grants management at UCSD. She makes really good money. She's over a team, of like 5 people in a chemistry department. And, together they're making a ton of money, and all they're doing is dotting I's and crossing T's. Now, unless you completely disintermediate the government, or the government adopts automated standards, a machine can't figure this out. I mean, this stuff is way beyond, maybe AIs in like 300 years can figure this stuff out, but the reality is there is no sense to it. Like, you find out what the answer is what they say it is. It's not written down anywhere. It's just what they tell you. Some of these things that you don't have to worry about FERPA or other things, I can tell you it's not true whenever you talk with these people. Yeah. I just sent an email today to them, and I had to encrypt my Excel file that had 2 student names in it, or else they would fail me on this thing. And there's a number of lawsuits on FERPA. Part of what is not really talked about in higher education, but there's almost like this old boys network of, if you have a big enough budget, they're going to leave you alone, because you probably can hire lobbyists that can get them fired. But if your budget is less than 200 million, then there's a different set of rules that you have to follow on these things. And if your budget's less than 20 million, there's a different set of rules. That's part of how the world works. So, what I was saying before is you got to find spaces that don't need the government regulation, like the tech industry. They're just saying, forget it, we don't care about the degrees. And then you're able to automate. So, that's why I was saying it's more likely to happen in a tech space or in some place like Upwork, where, you get a coding for currency coding, then I think that's, much more likely.
I want to kind of go back to the educational part of things, because that's the biggest issue that I see with the Wolff proposal. And this piggybacks a little bit off of what Deo said and others, but my biggest concern is if all we're doing is just replicating the way we've done education for the last 30 years, this thing's not going to work. Like, the reason why, places like Codecademy, Udacity, edX with their CS50 class are doing well is because they're changing the way that education works, and they're specifically trying to educate people in a different way. And all I could see in the Wolff, tutorials are great, but if all you're doing is writing essays, in what line of work are you going to go into where you just have to write a series of essays and that's all you do for your job? And if it's outside of academia, I don't know what it is. And so I think the missed opportunity, and I'd be curious to hear what others think of it. I think the missed opportunity, and this is what Deo was saying too, is that there's a chance here to really reinvent the way that we're doing education. And I don't think the blockchain is necessarily what is going to is what creates the new approach, but it's perhaps a catalyst that helps us think about a different way of approaching it.
How I worded it early on in my own mind was Western governors, Southern New Hampshire, and Apollo Group, known as University of Phoenix, because they're a business, did what blockchain is capable of allowing others to do. The others couldn't do it because of all the processes and cultures that exist that make it unadvisable. So remember I said early on, Wolff is the first tire being invented. When somebody comes up with the other 3, there's something that moves forward, and Amazon just came up with it, and it's called blockchain templates. So everybody, if we could all figure a way to be like Amazon and fulfill orders called education curriculum, credentials, might be a big move forward. Now, 25 years ago, when somebody came up with the first mail merge, everybody thought they were a genius because, we can now not have to do every single one by themselves. So if my student information system goes to Amazon Cloud, I can now buy a widget or a blockchain template and fulfill orders the way they do, which would be a breakthrough for students. But I first have to lose that fear in my mind of somebody has to plunk on the keyboard for every student. And we already understand the process. That's my thought. And
I agree. I think blockchain just happens to be the catalyst, and it can be a vehicle to ease this burden of looking at how to do things differently. Because we can all want to do it differently, but if you don't have the right utensils, if you don't have the right tools, it becomes such a laborious, expensive process, it's not doable. Finally, with blockchain, we start having a means and a method of creating that and making it a simplified process. Not an easy process, but a more simplified process, which I'm back to what Deo was saying. It's the same in what you're saying. It's an opportunity to really assure students are learning what they need to learn and not focusing so much on the method as the end state, knowing that there will be multiple methods and possibilities for how to reach that end state.
I'll add one more thing too. There's not one university that's amongst us that have enough money to buy blockchain in its fullest extent, or artificial intelligence, or virtual reality. And that's the key. Somehow you've got to be innovative enough to micro-innovate only that which applies to your institution. But you can't forego every technology neither. There's a happy medium between that. So if you search my name, you'll find an article called Micro Innovations. That's exactly what Amazon has done. They didn't set out to replace Walmart or UPS delivery, but they did it because they became experts at fulfilling the order of their consumers. And I think the first educational entity that gets close to that becomes the winner. Oxford, Wolff, they don't have to worry about the money like we do. And so we're never going to go full hook, line, and sinker blockchain, but I'm smart enough to know if I can do blockchain and prove the concept, now I start changing the behavior patterns. And we did that for free. Didn't cost us a dime.
I just had one thing to add regarding, we talked about the government regulation, and we talked about accreditation. But beyond all of that, right, when you simplify everything, is acquisition of knowledge and being able to demonstrate, and then the end result is really the employer, right? Because most students, regardless of how awesome your schools are, good percentage of them, they want to get jobs. So what we're missing here is the partnerships and collaboration with the employers, because if those credentials are validated directly through the employers, regardless if the government regulation and accreditors don't agree. If the students can demonstrate what the employers are looking for and the employers validate it, that's your way in. And so I feel like that's the piece where we can identify what those competencies are that the employers are looking for in those industries, make sure that they can buy in and validate it. Regardless of what the other stuff is. And I feel like that's where you can really leverage blockchain, because for sure at the end of it, if it's demonstrated, there's an end result to it.
Dale, you just nailed it. What your statement was, is that the only value blockchain brings to anybody is if they see the part of a bigger supply chain or value. Universities and colleges that are their own inclusive club, there's no value to blockchain. So, but if our value statement is all the way the credentials and assessment from K-12 into our university and then out to the employer, we've got a value chain happening. But if we don't care about that, we don't need blockchain.
I think I would just like to state maybe in a different way that, what the blockchain does is it creates a record, an immutable record that persists forever. And there's very few enterprise or business problem that requires a community of miners to manage replication to that extent. Most business problems and most things that we deal with are much more local. We don't need the whole forever timeline for that. And I think that's probably my big concern about the blockchain technology, and leaping too quickly to that as an answer to a lot of different solutions. The philosophy, however, behind trust and taking intermediaries out of the equation, those are all very, very noble. I just don't know if that's the right way to go about every single problem, including how we manage the education proposal.
In the early stages of digital badges, as they began to emerge and people started talking about the promise and possibility of micro-credentials, I mean, I think I probably wrote more articles than anybody on the planet. I did about 200, blog posts and things like that in the early years of it, looking at it from different angles and the like. There was a lot of talk and excitement about the issuing of the badges. And of course, we've surfaced here the fact that falls flat if there's not an ecosystem that values that currency. And I'm repeating myself in part here, but one of my concerns is that we do successfully generate an ecosystem that values a currency that decreases access and opportunity, like I talked about before. I see the promise in some of the comments shared about using this as an opportunity to leverage and explore new forms of measuring learning, or maybe I would say documenting experiences and learning as something even broader than the measurement of learning. For example, many of us still use letter grade systems. The letter grades were primarily an industrial revolution technology used to rate milk, meat, eggs, and bonds. All are things that expire and their rating changes over time. But in education, we use the same technology and we put it on a transcript forever, as if that learner's knowledge does not change over time. And so that's an incredibly limiting technology and means of thinking about how people learn. And it doesn't even give an accurate picture of one's expertise 6 months after it's been posted. So I think this is an incredible opportunity if we can leverage this growth of blockchain to and alongside of it, begin to explore and innovate around new ways of documenting learning in a way that truly does democratize and increase access opportunity, allow people to tell their stories and connect with other people who resonate with those stories. That's where I see some of the greatest promise. Yep. I'm stepping into a new college, and I'll stop here, I know I'm going along. I'm stepping into a new college, Goddard College, that has never used letter grade since 1938. They've used narrative feedback, pages of rich narrative feedback on a semester basis. And they have the database going all the way back to 1938. I can't wait to mine that data, by the way. Anyway, wow. The idea of semantic analysis of that rich data, that's a whole different way of thinking about this. And I know algorithms have their own risks and dangers and biases as well, especially when they're not transparent. But I'm intrigued by how we might be able to draw like these kinds of alternative forms of assessment into this conversation around blockchain.
I should have made a comment earlier about IBM has issued 1 million block certs or blockchain transcripts to their partner universities and colleges. So the flip of that is, who wants to partner with corporations? Not everybody, but to be able to get students your way from IBM, who's issuing already the blockchain certs, is pretty incredible. 1 million of them. So it's not just about Wolff, it's about moving parts, moving people, moving skills, moving credentials.
Mm. It seems to me that we're almost having two conversations here. Dr. Mathews, you're clearly a genuine futurist, and you've got a very impressive technology background. And I think if I hear you rightly, you see the technology as inevitable, and it's going to revolutionize the way that students have access to their data. And Dr. Sears, you're looking very specifically at the Wolff proposal and saying, I don't think this new technology is going to allow them to broker the trust that they're trying to replicate from this University of Oxford model. So it seems to me that we almost have two different conversations rolling and two different applications of this technology. Dr. Mathews, could you project out a little bit and just tell us, how are you applying blockchain into ORU's processes? What is ORU's use of this data, this technology, like in 5 years?
We issue this certificate right now to anybody who's doing continuing ed. We now do it automatically off their email and their fingerprint and or whatever other method they choose to validate, so I don't have to have an employee keep sending these out. Okay, but I'm also purposely trying to prove how simple it is, because people keep looking at the Wolff thing and seeing money and tokens and currency, and it has nothing to do with blockchain. It's a use of blockchain, but it has nothing to do with it. We're not mining tokens. We're not passing tokens. We're not trying to come up with a different currency. We're trying to help students, and blockchain just simply does that. So after today's meeting, I asked our provost, and she says, I want to know how quick we can do everything at ORU and blockchain now that she understands it. But it took probably 4 sessions of something like this to say, oh, that's what it is. Why was I hung up on currencies and tokens and mining and all that stuff? It had nothing to do with it.
So who holds that blockchain then? Like, where is it?
Yeah, who holds the blockchain is actually a company that has come up with the industry standard called Block Certs, called Learning Machine. And they're the ones doing the whole Malta deal. They're the ones working with Oxford. And that's why I know that you don't need any technical skills. And that's the day we live in with a smartphone and other things. I don't need a technical staff anymore to do what I should have did 10 years ago. 10 years ago, I needed a technical staff. Today, I don't. But it's back to the Internet of Things, cloud computing, all coming together. But that's why it's frustrating, trust me. I'm trying to detangle all these people who are talking about currencies and this and Bitcoin, because somehow they got it mixed in by reading 1 or 2 documents, and it has nothing to do with it.
And I understand that. I'm just trying to figure out, like, whereas LinkedIn, let's just take LinkedIn, you could put, when you get a badge, you're able to put it in your LinkedIn
Thumbs down
thing. Are you able, hold on.
Yep.
Why are you able to take, if you get if you get your credential blockchain, are you able to put it up on there?
I can decide to take my certificate today and post it to LinkedIn, but it's my decision, not the entity that's doing blockchain.
That's what I'm saying, but that could be your quote wallet that you have then.
Correct. Yeah, if you choose to. Yep.
Jonathan, to your point, there does seem to be clearly more than one conversation going on here, because I can see how the utilization of blockchain for such things as transcripts and perhaps some of those other things, that seems to me a much more simple and tangible way of utilizing blockchain. When I read the Woolf paper, part of my question had to do with the viability of, as some others have talked about, utilizing the model of the tutorial and the desirability of students to be willing to go through all the hassle of the utilization of the tokens, and and that they talk about the lack of their decrease in administrative oversight and things like that. Although it does seem that those advisors, or whatever they call them, are taking the role of administration in some ways, at least in terms of some things. And I just questioned, again, there seems to be a huge discrepancy, a huge gap between the more tangible application of blockchain to transcripts and data compared to the decentralization, as Dave talked about, the decentralization of the educational system, which seems so far beyond what Matthew you're talking about, Michael, in terms of what you've been able to do at Oral Roberts.
No, the good news is faculty have come up with the idea, but it's also faculty trying to write technical stuff. I mean, it's not a happy marriage.
Right.
Yeah.